Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's eInspire with Pastor Paul and the Nonpartisan Evangelical Podcast. These are my short thoughts I share daily, and once a week we share them publicly with everyone, and the rest of the week you can get them as a part of our Patreon community with Pastor Paul, our subscription service that helps support this work. And so welcome today as I share just a quick thought about what's going on in the Pastor Paul nonpartisan evangelical world. And one of the things my wife and I have been thinking about for a long time is revival. What would revival look like? We were praying for revival in our city and let it come, God. And we've started learning that maybe revival looks different than what we think. And I came across an amazing TikTok video that I have to share in regards to the topic. And so let me share that with you now.
What's one thing that you can say that'll trigger an entire generation?
Evangelicals, Baptists, fundamentalists, conservative Christians, listen up. You've prayed for years, decades even, for a revival in the church. All I heard was, bring it back to Jesus. Lord, let them bring it back to Jesus. It's happening. It's ongoing. You're just on the wrong side of it. You prayed for a revival, you got it, and you don't like how it looks.
Wow. She said it, didn't she? That we're a generation that has prayed for revival, and our young people are having an awakening to a spirituality that looks different than the Christianity of the evangelical baby boomer, or maybe even the Catholic baby boomer or Mormon baby boomer, and even the Gen Xers who have just been overshadowed by the boomers, and we don't like it. In fact, we curse it quite a bit. But my wife and I have seen how this next generation, though not perfect and flawed like any generation, has a heart to see a revival that looks different than what we thought. Because we believed revival was going to be church services in our buildings with loud music. And for those of us in the charismatic stream, maybe with a lot of manifestations of Holy Spirit and God coming to earth. And we thought that would be revival. And maybe our more conservative Christian friends thought it would be a bunch of people getting saved and saying the sinner's prayer. And we're seeing that's not happening. In fact, we're going in the opposite direction from that. But what we're really seeing is a heart that's in alignment with God's heart to care for people, to love your neighbor as yourself, and to care for everything that lives around us. That is growing like never before. And a generation of boomers are cursing it and saying it doesn't look like what we thought revival would look like. And this has been a journey for my wife and I as well, because we wanted to see our revival, but we're learning that revival actually looks like people who are willing to humble their hearts, hear the stories of others, and lay down their lives. It's a generation that says we'll give up our self-righteousness and self-protection to see another generation rise up and see the fullness of the promise of God and the promise of humanity. If God's Spirit truly was poured out on all flesh, as it says in the book of Acts. But unfortunately, today we have a generation that refuses to relinquish its grip on culture to the very last day of its existence. And the younger generations, maybe I should say, millennials and Gen Zs are looking at that generation and saying, you guys are full of shit and we reject your belief system. And that's very scary to the older generation. And I believe that mindset of the older generation, what the Bible would call hard-heartedness, like our fathers in the desert, an unwillingness to lay down our self-righteousness and self-protection, brings the wrath of the ages to that generation. But I want to tell you the good news today, it also clears the way for the promise of the ages for the next generation. I've been talking about being sad and glad at the same time, that in the book of Lamentations, I'll talk this week about how Jeremiah mourned for his people that their belief system and their culture was wrecked. But he also was glad because he said, this is what has to happen so the new thing can come. Jesus also talked about it, and I'll talk more about it this week in the eInspires, that he was glad that the temple was going to be destroyed, but at the same time wailed and moaned over his city of Jerusalem that he loved, saying, you almost saw the greatness of God happen as he was headed down to Jerusalem towards his crucifixion. So we can be extremely grieved and hurt for the church that we're leaving behind and we've loved so much, while still knowing that in Isaiah chapter 43, God says, this is the process of how it goes. Things have to die and something new will rise up. And in Isaiah 43, God says, a new thing is springing up. Can't you see it? Do you not perceive it? Something new is happening. So to my deconstructing friends out there, yeah, we can lament the pain of our church and its perhaps impending overturn as I see it, but also be glad that something new can spring up out of that. Hope you have a great day and are a little bit inspired.